When Henry Luce coined the term American century in the early 1940s, 40% of the century was already done, and already by the 1970s, people were talking about the end of it. So it was kind of a pretty truncated century. I mean, if the definition of a century, which last I checked was relatively not disputable, is 100 years, then the American century lasted a whole lot less than that. And we have spoken about this, and it's certainly a useful way of thinking about what is the most dominant thing that's shaping any given moment in time. But I'm not clear that there ever was one to the degree that we thought. I mean, there's clearly been kind of a Western 200 years shaping the global rules of intercourse between the state system, treaties, trade, and in that sense, the entire world has become a world either shaped by 19th century Europeans in terms of concepts of law and treaties and state relations, and some of that predates, but a lot of the framework that we all function in is pretty much true everywhere in the world. I mean, even if you're North Korea, you're in some sense working through or against the same set of institutions that everybody else is working through or against. And in that respect, I don't see any really immediate change in that. I mean, the fact that China sets up its own version of a development bank is different, right? It's a different bank. It's got different charters and different funding, but it's still a development bank that kind of looks like, a development bank. It doesn't look like some completely new sui generis creation to fund infrastructure projects. It's just their way of funding infrastructure projects. So I think more importantly is whatever the shape of the next 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right now there's no evidence of some massive shift in the way international relations, as understood as international relations, is going to be conducted, and that follows a kind of a Western script. So even if it's China taking some of the lead in that script in a certain region, or states competing in Asia over who's going to dominate that region, or whether or not anyone's going to dominate that region, it's going to be done through, I think, a very familiar set of institutions, all of which have their derivation in the 1940s and 1950s. And it's possible that some sort of Buddhist higher consciousness a la Robert Thurman is going to take over and become the norm of the way in which we all interact globally, and that would be revolutionary and lovely and eye-opening and extraordinary, and absolutely tectonically different than anything in which we currently do. But I'm not holding my breath, and I don't mean that in any disrespect. I mean, I think it'd be great if we could all sit down and say Om Mani Padme Hum before we dealt with nuclear weapons, but I don't think that's happening right now. So I don't know who's going to dominate. I don't know if anyone's going to dominate. I'm not sure we ever dominated the way in which we think we dominated. I mean, it's convenient now to kind of nostalgize, but I think anybody who's thought about these things, for like 15 minutes in human existence between 1945 and maybe the mid-1950s, where the United States accounted for 50% of all global industrial output because Europe was a wreck and Japan was destroyed and China was engaged in a massive internecine civil war. The United States had preponderant power and also a military that was still standing. But other than that, there's never been this easy time of kind of America bestriding the world like a colossus, except in our own self-imagination and to some degree others' convenient self-imagining.